So, a Game of Thrones movie was just announced, and I, for one, hope that George R. R. Martin has nothing to do with it. Please, Mr. Martin, if you're listening, which I know you are, just finish the books. The movie will come in time. But I still think it'd be interesting to go through what might occur in this movie, what it might cover, as this has been announced in the way that so many MCU movies are announced and then subsequently canceled before they see any light of day or have any significant production done on them whatsoever. We know there's no writer attached. We know there's just kind of planning stages going on at HBO right now. So, today I thought it'd be fun to go through and discuss what areas of Westerosi and Essosi history could be the best in order to have a movie of them, as there are a number of different options, and I think that there are a number of stories to tell in this world that could really benefit from the singularity of form that comes from a movie. You don't have to worry about varying quality from episode to episode, or season to season, or different directorial or writing visions for each episode. It's just a singular person's ideas and story come into fruition, which I would be very excited to see in this universe, as we haven't really gotten to do that since 2011. Before getting into what I think this movie is and should be, let's get into what it can't be and what it won't be. I don't think it's going to cover any of the material that is covered in the spin-off stories of Game of Thrones, the HBO show. So it's not going to be anything Dance of the Dragons. Obviously, that's covered by House of the Dragon. It's not going to be Dunk and Egg, which is disappointing because I think those would have been great movies, as they are shorter than the Game of Thrones book, but still have a lot of heart and a lot of just promise as a narrative. And additionally, we know it's not going to be Aegon's Conquest. Aegon's Conquest is currently in development at HBO as a show. There is a writer attached to it. I do really like a lot of the stuff he's saying about it. He's treating it like a Napoleon story, which I think is a really cool historical angle to view it from. Additionally, I know your hopes were way up. I'm sorry to dash them. This probably won't be Yi Ti, as there is an animated show in the works about the Golden Empire, which I think is the most anticipated thing. I would rather have that than the Winds of Winter, but that, the Corlys Velaryon show, and there are a few other shows in development at HBO, but it's unclear what those are at this point. No Jon Snow show is currently existing, so, I mean, the movie could be that. I really hope it's not. Before we get into all of the ideas that I'm going to pitch, I need to hear your idea for a World of Ice and Fire movie. Pitch it to me in the comments down below. While you're down there, leave a like, subscribe for more Song of Ice and Fire stuff. The biggest idea I've seen pitched, as has been the case for literally any unnamed spin-off project, show, movie, whatever, is Robert's Rebellion. This is always a big point of interest for people, as it is such a monumental event in setting the stage for the main series of Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones. It is a really fascinating event that Martin has written with more kind of intricate depth than a lot of his history, and I do think it would be fascinating, but I'm not entirely sure that a movie would be the best way to tell that story, as it is very sprawling and it contains a lot of moving pieces that might not fit into a movie. A lot would have to meet the cutting room floor, as there is history of this conflict dating back to even the War of the Nine Penny Kings. So it's unclear on exactly how that might come to screen. Robert will obviously be a very good candidate for main character. Ned Stark also could. But I think that even looking at both of those, the war takes about a year and a half to 2 years in order to complete. And I think that if we're looking at the War of the Five Kings in Game of Thrones, that took about, I think, 2.5 to 3 seasons, which is about 30 hours of television, which would have to be condensed to, at maximum, a 3-hour movie. So I'm not entirely sure that Robert's Rebellion would be the best in terms of a movie adaptation, at least in terms of not having everything cut from it. I think if they're going to do Robert's Rebellion, the best way to carry it out is to narrow the scope to a singular character. Robert is the natural fit, as he is the leader of this rebellion, but I think Ned Stark is actually kind of a better idea, insofar as he does see a lot of the important events, at least of the back half of this war. He's there for the sack of King's Landing, or at least he gets there after the fact and sees Jaime Lannister on the throne, before going south to Dorne and rescuing Baby Jon from the Tower of Joy. He fights and kills the Kingsguard. It would be really cool to see Arthur Dayne in action. That we did kind of see in Game of Thrones, so it was kind of lame. And then re-delivering Dawn to Ashara Dayne at Starfall. I don't know why that was so much of a tongue twister for me. But regardless, I think that he does serve the best kind of singularity of vision for Robert's Rebellion as a conflict in terms of adapting it to an on-screen story. I think that if you're going to focus on a character, he is a very natural fit, as he was the main character of the first book as well. So there's a lot of goodwill built up for Ned Stark. If we're looking at what's likely to get turned into some sort of adaptation, we of course need to look at material that is going to be adapted. One point that I haven't really seen people bring up is the fact that there is exactly one A Song of Ice and Fire book that really hasn't been adapted to any degree by anything. And by book, I mean it's kind of a short story novella type thing. House of the Dragon is based on Fire and Blood, which is adapted from three short stories. The first two are in House of the Dragon, those being The Rogue Prince and The Princess and the Queen. Those cover the essentially events of the Dance of the Dragon, focusing on Rhaenyra and Alicent, and then on Daemon. However, that is, as I said, two of the three novellas. The first of them was The Sons of the Dragon. Aegon Targaryen had two sons, both of whom were very different, and both of whom's rules were essentially very harmful on Westeros and very formative to the Targaryen dynasty. Maegor and Aenys were the names of Aegon's sons, and they had a very interesting dynamic and a number of interesting developments during both of their reigns, including several wars and rebellions breaking out. I've always thought that that would be a better television adaptation than The Conquest. I was hoping that The Conquest would be a movie, but I suppose you could reverse that and have Sons of the Dragons be a movie after potentially a Conquest series. I don't know if the Conquest series would be more than one season. If that's the case, if it is only one season, I could see it being followed up successfully by a Sons of the Dragon movie. Otherwise, it might be kind of difficult in terms of the timing of the series versus the movie, as I'm sure you really don't want a Sons of the Dragon movie coming out in the middle of a Conquest series. George R. R. Martin recently made a blog post detailing a number of unwritten short stories he considered instead of Dunk and Egg back when he was being charged with writing this little novella for a compilation book with a bunch of other writers. One of those stories is about Barristan Selmy. It's unclear what part of that knight's life would be covered in this short story, but there is a lot to cover. Not only is he still alive in a viewpoint in the main series, which I don't think would be covered in the movie, there are a number of really interesting and really cinematic points in Barristan Selmy's life. The main one that comes to mind for me is the Defiance of Duskendale, this situation where King Aerys II, the Mad King, was kidnapped by a rebel lord, and Barristan was able to break him out in a single night against the wishes of Tywin Lannister. Not only would this involve a number of characters with which the audience is already familiar, but it could be a really kind of fun, almost heist movie type thing. Combination heist movie and kind of chivalric honor thing. I'd really be into it. Additionally, the War of the Ninepenny Kings is another angle. This was the fifth Blackfyre Rebellion and involved a rebel claimant trying to claim the Iron Throne through the Stepstones with a band of marauding kings. Barristan goes and fights as a young knight, and it essentially ends when he kills Maelys the Monstrous, the last surviving Blackfyre, at least of the male line. I think that if we're thinking about a movie in Westeros, Barristan is a very strong contender for the main character. Another idea could be to go further back and remove it from anything that's going on in the present story to a pretty large degree, that being looking at Valyria before the Doom. While this would be a really cool concept to explore, as it is the kind of Roman Empire analog, and it could have a lot of interesting stories to tell, I do not think that is going to be something that will be explored either as a movie or in general, as a show, as a book, as what have you. It's too spoilery. I feel like we'd learn too much, not only about the magic and the powers that lurk within this world, but also about dragons, dragon lore, and all similar types of information. I don't think Martin would really allow that story to happen, and I think that it is a lot better to have this just kind of be this mysterious element lurking in the background. I tend to do that with my D&D stories as well. It's good to have an old dead empire that is working there to provide flavor and history to your world, but you don't ever really want to explore that for sake of both spoilers and not really having a ton to flesh out there. Another idea could be the first Blackfyre Rebellion. Now, this is something that a lot of people want to see on screen. It leads to a series of 5 wars, the last of which I mentioned in the Barristan segment, but it is kind of tricky to do. Not only is it also kind of an extended political drama that might be more suited to a show than a movie, but also it's just kind of similar to the Dance of the Dragons, just without dragons. Insofar as it is a Targaryen civil war, and I feel like people might be kind of sick of the blonde dragon people having civil wars on their screen by the time whatever year this movie comes out would come to pass. So I don't know if that's the most likely. It could be very cool, and there's a fair bit written on this period in the world of Ice and Fire. Though, with that said, there are a fair few gaps as Martin is trying to not spoil things for future Dunk and Egg stories. So it is unclear. He is currently writing Blood and Fire, it sounds like, or at least partially. Hopefully, he's writing Winds. But yeah, I think that it's not the most likely, but it could be cool for a story. Something that I really don't want to consider, but I kind of have to because I feel like the mainstream, I don't know, maybe wants it, maybe virulently doesn't. But there could be some talk of like a sequel thing. We know that Kit Harington has said, oh, there was this Jon Snow show in the works, but maybe that's now a movie. Maybe there's a movie about Arya going west of Westeros, as Martin just hinted to something on his blog there. I don't think that's it, but I'll get to that in a second. Overall, I hope it's not a sequel series. I think that tying itself too closely to Game of Thrones might be to this movie's detriment. I think if it's going to do anything for Game of Thrones, the thing that people might actually want to see is maybe somewhat of a redux. Maybe it's like a movie of a Game of Thrones. So I don't know, that's not. They wouldn't really have enough room to do anything. It took 10 hours of television to do that. Maybe it's a movie about Jon Connington and Aegon the Sixth Targaryen and Essos as a supplement to the TV show so they can add them in when they redo season 6, 7, and 8. As far as I'm concerned, there's one idea that stands above the rest as a better and more practical adaptation of a World of Ice and Fire movie than all the rest. No offense to the ideas I've already pitched here. Specifically, I think that the movie is going to be an adaptation of the stage play Tourney at Harrenhal that is currently in development. For those of you who don't know, there is a play that is currently being written and will be put on in London's West End of this Tourney at Harrenhal. It was a big celebration that involved a number of characters in the main series, specifically before the main series, prior to Robert's Rebellion, plotting and falling in love at this big party full of jousting. It's a really interesting premise, and I think it would be really cool to see the seeds of not only Robert's Rebellion, but the main series being planted in this form. I, for one, am really looking forward to this play, but being an American, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get out and see it. I think it makes a lot of sense to adapt this from the stage to the screen in order to allow a wider audience to see it and maybe allow for a wider production level and budget and all of that typical concerning stuff. I think it'd be really cool to see Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark begin to form a connection. It could be cool to see some of the plotting that people theorized took place there, all these Southron ambitions, and potentially Rhaegar trying to replace his dad as king, but getting foiled by Aerys showing up at the tournament. It's just a very dramatic sequence, and I think that there is a lot of meat to chew on there to adapt into a movie, and Jon Connington would be in it, so I'm on board. And hey, HBO, if my idea does happen, if I did call this, you know who could play a young John Connington at Harrenhal? I'm just saying. I'm not British. I've never acted before, but I think I know the character okay. I am fully emotionally prepared for this movie to never happen and never get made, but I have to cling to hope, as has been the case with Wins. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. It's free and it does help me grow the channel. I had a little bit of time between bigger projects and thought it'd be fun to talk about what could happen with this Ice and Fire movie, as it is something that is pretty unique that we really haven't heard about in this world before. Thank you all again so much for watching. I'll have more on Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, Duncan Egg, all of that great stuff, and A Song of Ice and Fire in the very near future. So thank you again for watching, and goodbye, everyone.